Hi, I'm Paul Roberts, and this is Conscious Counseling 101. I've been talking recently about various topics and things that I think might be of interest with my brother. One of the things that he had said recently is that I should take more time researching in a more succinct manner rather than letting the streaming flow of consciousness come out. Well, that's not really how I'm built. I'll try to do this in a live way so that I can do streaming consciousness and also resource sharing. So anyway, here we are at the Laura Plantation, River Road, near the Mississippi in Louisiana. I've been touring, my children are touring this right now, having the official guided tour, and I'm going to spend some time, since I've already toured it before, I'm going to spend some time looking at this museum things and reading the articles and such. One of the things I wanted to bring out here was Fats Domino. His parents, once we were in the post-war period here, lived here and worked here as free people in the slave quarters and made $1 a day. And then after the 1927 flood, they went to the Ninth Ward in New Orleans. He was too young to play initially with Louis Armstrong because he was born in 1927. Louis had already moved on to Chicago by that time. What's important to recognize is this other youngster right here underneath. His name is Freddie Keppard. And he was known as the king of New Orleans music scene. Now, Louis Armstrong watched him. Now, unfortunately, we didn't have recorded music of him, and we cannot know what he sounded like. Louis Armstrong commented on his sound. He says, he played the cornet and how. He had the most perfect lips of any man I've ever heard through the years of real good music. Yes, we were young rookies, such as myself. We'd thrill at just the idea of sitting in the big shot's chair, such as Freddie Keppard. So what we see through Freddie Keppard is, first off, he had the ability to be free and develop what he developed. But then we have Louis Armstrong that came along, and through his inspiration for this man, one of the best he's ever heard, he became what he became. And of course he had to be free to do that. And then he had to be free even in the difficult times when people didn't want him in their special places. He'd come and stay in our home. That was before we owned it. And Mr. Frangus would allow him and other jazz greats to come in because they weren't welcome in other places. Well, later, my son became interested in jazz because of the history of our home, and of course because of my history in loving music. And with my brother John, we learned to love the drums and music together. Now, he went a different route, and I learned different things as I went through life. My way got me to the house where my son was introduced to Louis and to jazz, and he ended up being a jazz musician, helped him get into college, helped him to become a zoologist and conservationist, and that's going to help him to help the world one day. And I wanted to just say that one of the things my brother said in a previous video was that we can't have the government forcing us to sin. Well, I just wanted to say that if the government forces us to not conserve, not take care of our earthly resources or the animals, well then we'd be, according to the Bible, not being good stewards of this earth the way that God commanded us to in the garden, and tend the garden and name the animals and be stewards of the animals. If we have a president that wants to look beyond or look past the importance of the endangered species and loosen regulations for pollution and such, and our lands we have set aside for the purposes, uses that are good for our nation, we are forced to not be good stewards of the animals or the resources of the earth. And even though it's not my choice to do that, we're forced to live as a nation that doesn't care for those things. So we're not sinning, but we're forced to be a part of a people that's sinning. Now, my point on the abortion was we would never have the abortion, we're against it. We're for the right to have choice because God's the only one that should judge. Even if we had a law that said we had the right to choose, we've not been sinning because we're not choosing that choice, see? But if we go and don't tend to the animals and don't tend to the earth and don't conserve, then we are forced to sin, at least in the people we're in, because our tax monies go towards that. Now, I agree that tax money should not go for abortions, because that would be wrong, because then our tax monies would be going towards other people's choices to sin. But I think we should arrange for it in a way such that we have it available to us if we must, and we should pay for it if we must, and our judgment from our Creator will be rendered to us based on if we choose that. That's where I stand on that. And the reason is because we do not want the government to force us to sin. But if they tell us what to do with our own bodies, then eventually they'll tell us what to do with our own bodies, and they'll make us take the mark for commerce and for sustainability of our own bodies and our lives. That would be being forced to sin, because if we took it, we'd be taking the mark of the beast. That would be a forcing of sin. Now, one of the reasons why I stand for not having abortion is because we know that that great life could grow up and do something great in God's hands if it's a divinely brought forth life between two loving people that are joined together in one flesh, serving Jesus as the rock. And it's very important that we realize that just life alone doesn't have to be ordained by God. And we had the old covenant, we saw that life was not ordained by God. And we had terrible things would come to those people that did not follow the ways of the Lord. We were reading in Leviticus 26 the other day, rereading the Old Testament, that there was a lot of law laid down for how man was to be in interaction in that covenant with the Lord. And if they did what was commanded to them, they would receive good, healthy lives and bounty and blessings from the Lord. But if they did not, they would be cursed. They also would be able to, if you remember, they'd be able to be once again blessed. The Old Testament has a lot of this in it. And what I'm saying, John, is that if we don't get these things right and we put our faith in man and we learn to do things based on what we can gain from them, and we don't follow the Lord and through Jesus' teachings, then what we're ultimately doing is we're allowing the things in this world to be carved out by government and those in authority and told to the people how it must be. And if we don't resist and show our face to them and Jesus in the light of the word inside of it, reflecting to them, then those we're subject to will force us ultimately to do the wrong things. So if you really believe that you don't want to be made to sin, then you should be very, very wary of what you allow your government to tell you to do. When the government tells me that I have a choice, I am simply allowed to make that choice or not. And based on my following the Lord, I choose not.